Hello, brothers and sisters. Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to Priests for Life TV. Thank you for taking the time to watch because you're about to see another broadcast segment on this brand new internet pro-life television channel. We are going to bring you quality programming from the present as well as from the past. Live events, pre-taped events. You'll see homilies, you'll see interviews, you'll see talks at various pro-life gatherings, prayer vigils, commercials, music videos, a whole combination of inspirational and instructional material that we've put together over the years and that our team continues to put together. So I hope that you'll enjoy this broadcast segment that's about to begin and share it with others. Tell other people about Priests for Life TV. And share these videos with them so that they too can find the strength and the knowledge they need to be part of the pro-life movement. Enjoy now these broadcasts of Priests for Life TV. Hello friends, Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Thank you so much for watching Priests for Life TV. You know, every year on the day of the National March for Life in Washington, D.C., I'm privileged to organize and preach at the National Prayer Service, the time when people from around the country, in preparation for this great march, energize themselves spiritually and gather in an interdenominational service with clergy and lay people from dozens of denominations, all united together to speak up and to march for the children in the womb. Well, I want to show you the sermon I gave at the 2016 National Prayer Service, and it was marked by another special event. We usually give a pro-life award in the context of this National Prayer Service, and this particular year we gave the award to Sam Brownback, who at that time was the governor of Kansas. And you'll see why we gave him that award. He has been a faithful pro-life warrior ever since, and now he is serving as an ambassador for religious freedom worldwide as part of the Trump administration. So enjoy this sermon, be inspired by it, and be inspired by the example of public service given by people like Governor Sam Brownback.
Well, brothers and sisters, we have come to Washington today for a reason. We have come to Washington today for a reason that inspires people of many generations to come to this same place. We have come to Washington today for a reason that has inspired our movement for life from the beginning and will inspire it until its goal is accomplished. We come to Washington for a reason that has inspired other movements for justice, for life, for equality. A reason that inspired the people that again gathered in so many places just this past Monday as our nation observed the federal holiday in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. I was in Atlanta with Dr. Alveda King of our Priests for Life team and her family, and many veterans of the civil rights movement were there. And many of its greatest preachers and orators were there as well, delivering not just 2 hours of prayer, praise, and preaching, like we're going to have here today, but over 4.5 hours of the same. But friends, it didn't feel like 4.5 hours because we were lifted up. We were lifted up by the great ideals that inspired this nation from its beginning. That we do have rights that come from God, not government. That we know what those rights are. And that we live in a land and under a system of government where those rights can actually be preserved against the forces of evil, against the will of tyrants, that those rights can actually be preserved, and that if they are infringed, there's a way to correct that. There's a way to stand up against that. There's a way to protest that. And to do it peacefully and effectively without revolution, without bloodshed, if we use the means that have been given us. And one of those means is that we make our presence known here in the seat of power of this federal government. That we make our presence known, that we let our voices be heard. And as Martin Luther King Jr. said to those in the civil rights movement, the stomp, stomp, stomp of marching feet is the way that justice proceeds, especially in the face of intolerable injustice. Stomp, stomp, stomp of marching feet. We're here. We're here with our fellow citizens from all over the nation. We are here to do precisely that. Because we are here, as our brothers and sisters in the civil rights movement were here, to cash in on a check. A check, unfortunately, that has come back from our government marked insufficient funds. You remember when our brothers and sisters in the civil rights movement said this? They said, we've come here to cash in on the promise of our founding fathers, on the promise of this nation, and somehow the nation is telling us there are insufficient funds for our rights to be recognized, for our participation in society to be realized, for our place in this great nation to be afforded to us in an equal way as it is to our other brothers and sisters. We protest because we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the vaults of freedom and justice in America. So our brothers and sisters marched in this very city. They rallied in this very city for that purpose, fueled by that ideal. Brothers and sisters, are we here today on that same basis? Are we here today for that same purpose? Do we believe that there are still funds in the vaults of America? Do we believe that there are enough funds in the vaults of freedom and justice in America to give life to our brothers and sisters in the womb, to protect them against violence? That is why we march. It is a simple demand, as simple as it is profound. That there can be no America, there can be no freedom for any group of people when freedom is denied to any other group of people. We are in this together. This is not just about protecting one group of people. This is about saying if they're not protected, and if our nation thinks it can move forward by continuing to fail to protect them, then you know what? We are all in danger. If their lives are not secure, neither are ours. Neither are ours. Because we're standing on the same basis. On the same basis. By what basis are you recognized as human? If somebody denied your humanity, how would you prove it? Would you give them a DNA sample? From your skin? From your hair? How would you prove your humanity to those who would deny it? And whatever way you would use, brothers and sisters, to prove your humanity, we can prove the humanity of the brothers and sisters we march for today. And if a nation can have a blind spot so deep, a blind spot so stubborn, that even in the light of the science we have today that we have never had before, even in the light of knowledge we have of the unborn child, knowledge that we have more of from the time of Roe v. Wade until today than we ever had in human history, if despite that clear evidence our nation can have a blind spot so stubborn that the unborn still remain unprotected, then mark my words, it can turn a blind eye to you and me as well. Because the evidence is just as clear, just as conclusive, that these children are of the same humanity as we are. It cannot be more clear. And brothers and sisters, our nation does have a blind spot, and I go back again to Monday. to that beautiful oratory that we experienced in Atlanta, Georgia, at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church where Martin Luther King himself preached. We heard preaching on Monday. We heard people get up there and say the very words that I just said to you. If freedom is denied to any group of people, it cannot be promoted for anybody else. Those words were spoken in Ebenezer Baptist Church. You know what else was said by the keynote speaker on Monday? What was said there was, it is a heretical notion to think that some lives are more valuable than other lives. It was also said there that what is at issue here is not simply the cause of African Americans, but the cause of human life itself. What was said there, after litanies of social evils were recited one after another, it was said there that the summary of everything that was being proclaimed was that it's simply wrong to kill human beings, period. That's what was said there. And everyone applauded, and everyone stood up, and people were jumping up in the air, and people were saying amen. Elected officials were there. Media personalities were there. Cultural influencers in the black community were there. And they too marched. And they marched on the streets of Atlanta, and they marched all across the country, and many of us were with them, as we should be. But brothers and sisters, there was a blind spot in that ceremony on Monday. There was a gap. Not a word was spoken about the unborn. Not a syllable was uttered about those against whom the most massive outpouring of violence is currently happening. Are we living in a different world than our brothers and sisters with whom I worshiped and prayed on Monday in Atlanta? Are we somehow living in a different country where perhaps this isn't a problem? Or are we living in the very same nation in which thousands of times a day, and let's talk about what this is, not in some kind of abstract terms, in which thousands of times a day, as abortionists have testified under oath, a heart can still be beating as it gets sucked through the catheter and into the collection jar. It can still be beating for up to a minute after that body of that child is sucked out into the suction tube in a suction abortion in the first trimester of pregnancy. The heart. Or as we go forward in pregnancy, as our United States Supreme Court has even acknowledged, that legs and arms are torn off of living children, piece by piece. That as, again, abortionists, Martin Haskell, Warren Hearn, and others have testified and written about in medical textbooks, that skulls are brought out piece by piece rather than as a unified whole. Dismemberment abortion. Not the actions of some kind of barbaric terrorist, not the actions that violate the law and for which one in these great United States of America might be thrown in jail, not the actions that law enforcement in this great country might try to stop, but actions indeed declared by the highest court to be legal. Are we living in the same country as those who can stand up and say that there ought not to be the taking of innocent life by gun violence or drug violence or any kind of violence? The same country that will say that we must protect ourselves from the wicked will of terrorists who have no regard for innocent human life. And at the same time, they have this absolutely rigid blind spot to the unborn. We're here for a purpose today. We're here in the United States Capitol to say the blindness will end. We don't have that blind spot. We can see. And that's not an expression of arrogance. That's not saying we're better than anybody else. No, by no means. We don't come to Washington for the March for Life out of self-righteousness because we don't believe that we're better than anybody else. We just know when that God gives us sight and He gives us insight that we have responsibility to respond. That's why we're here. We're not here because we're better. When God lets us know, we must act. That's why we march. We march with compassion today. Not just compassion for those babies being torn apart legally. We are the ones who march with compassion for the women who are in such desperate straits. They don't get abortions because of freedom of choice. They get abortions because they feel they have no freedom and no choice. And we understand that because we walk with them and we minister to them and we reach out to them and we provide help for them. There are 5 times as many pregnancy centers in the United States as there are abortion facilities. And we are the ones providing the choice to women. Let nobody say we don't understand the circumstances of these women. The people marching on this march today are the people who operate the pregnancy centers across the United States and who serve the networks of those centers. We in pro-life leadership help to train these people and recruit them day after day and sustain them spiritually. We know what we're talking about when we speak about these mothers. And the despair that fills our hearts. We're not marching today because we want to take people's rights away. We're marching today because we want to take away their despair. That's what we're doing. This is a movement that replaces despair with hope, because hope gives you the strength to say yes to life. Hope given to those who feel they have no freedom and no choice and therefore go to the abortion clinic, and hope to those brothers and sisters, and we will see them again today, who are in despair because of the abortion that has already occurred. They will be here with us too. I have the privilege of being the pastoral director for the world's largest ministry for healing after abortion, and Rachel's Vineyard continues to grow in this nation and around the world, especially now in this year of mercy, where the church is proclaiming even more loudly, even more clearly, that we who reject abortion do not reject those who have had abortions. We embrace them with forgiveness and love and mercy and compassion. They're marching with us today too. You've seen them, you'll see them again today. I regret my abortion. The men, I regret lost fatherhood. And the children, I mourn my aborted sibling. They will be holding the signs. And the grandparents, I mourn my aborted grandchild. Look for them today. You'll see people with signs that say, I regret providing abortions. I regret performing abortions. These are all part of our Silent No More campaign. And brothers and sisters, their voices are becoming louder than ever. And there is no way the abortion industry can turn those voices off. No way. It'll only grow. Because with every passing day, the wound expands to more and more people. Do you think their voices can be silenced? There is absolutely nothing that the abortion forces can do to silence those voices. There is absolutely nothing that the pro-abortion members of Congress and the pro-abortion members of the executive branch or of the judicial branch can do. Despite their own blindness, nothing they can do to keep those voices from rising up like a mighty tidal wave. You will see them and hear them again today. Well, brothers and sisters, the blind spot continues. It continues, and we continue to bear witness against it. You know, I was reflecting in the intercessions that we had today for our nation and for our nation's leaders, that we're going to have to change the wording of our prayer service next year. We're going to have this service here again on next year's March for Life. There's going to be at least one thing in the text of the prayers that's going to be different than it's been for the last 7 years. We're going to have to take President Obama's name out of there. He's not going to be president of the United States anymore. going to be putting the name of a new president into that prayer, those prayers of intercession for next year. And brothers and sisters, because we are not blind, because we know the reality of the violence that's going on, and because we know that standing up for these babies is completely consistent with standing up in compassion and mercy for their mothers, their fathers, and their families, and even for the abortionists, because we know that, we're confident in what we are doing. And that's why we can confidently also go in to the political arena in this election year and elect public servants who know the difference between serving the public and killing the public. And if a public servant does not know the difference between serving the public and killing the public, he or she does not belong in public office. Now, some people will say to you, and they'll say to me, the pro-life movement should not be a partisan movement. It should not be promoting any particular party. It should not be discrediting any particular party. It should not be standing for some particular candidate. It should not be standing against a particular candidate. The pro-life movement is supposed to be beyond partisan politics, and so is the church. You can't have in the church some kind of partisan message. The church is not some kind of political party. Brothers and sisters, I fully agree. I absolutely fully agree. And I ask you this: if tomorrow the candidates running for public office and asking for your vote were to all get together, and those who were pro-life were to become pro-choice, and those who were pro-choice were to become pro-life overnight, would anything of your message or my message change? Then how are we partisan? Tomorrow, the Democratic Party becomes pro-life, the Republican Party becomes pro-choice. Tomorrow, announcement is made on the morning news. You tell me what I should say different in this sermon. You tell me what you should say different. When you write an article, when some of you who are clergy preach a sermon, what changes? Nothing changes, because we don't stand on the platform of the Republican Party. We don't stand on the platform of the Democratic Party. We don't stand on the platform of any party than the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm going to tell you today, if you think for one moment that the gospel of Jesus Christ requires you to be silent when there's a Holocaust going around you, you got the wrong gospel. You got the wrong idea of what Jesus requires. He does not require silence. He does not require neutrality. He's the opposite of silence. He is the eternal word that speaks up, that speaks forth, that speaks a word into the silence, destroying the silence, because he's got to destroy the blindness. He's the light. The gospel can't be preached if we're silent, and he is not neutral. God Almighty is not neutral. As a matter of fact, the God who unites us here today, he is a great unifier. There has hardly been any aspect of the pro-life movement and of the pro-life cause that I have been more passionate about than about unifying this great movement, bringing together people from ethnic, religious, and even different political backgrounds together in the fight for the most basic principle on which this nation stands, life itself. But I tell you today, God, who is the great unifier, is also the great divider. From the beginning of the scriptures to the end, he is the great divider between light and darkness, truth and error, life and death. You notice what he does at the creation of the world? Read the first chapter of Genesis. What does he do? He divides the light from the darkness. He divides the waters from above the heavens from those below. Dividing the waters from the land, he divides. Precisely so that creation can come to be. He's the great divider. When Elijah stood before the prophets of Baal and the prophet and the people of Israel, he said, stop straddling the fence. Decide today whom you will serve. If it is the Lord, then serve him. If it is Baal, then serve him. But stop trying to straddle along with two opinions. There is no room for neutrality among the followers of the living God. God divides. Jesus Christ said in the end, when the judgment occurs, the king will sit upon his throne and he will do what? What does he say? He will divide. He will separate the people as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. He will divide. Why? Because there is no partnership between life and death. There is no partnership between sin and grace, between truth and falsehood. We must divide them forever. And they will be divided forever, and that's the meaning of the last judgment. Division is negative only when it confuses the evil with the person. It's not the people who promote abortion who are evil. It's abortion that's evil. It's not the people who get abortions who are evil. It's the abortions that are evil. And it's not the child in a problem pregnancy who's the problem. The problem manifests itself in many ways. Lack of resources, lack of support, lack of involvement of the father. Whatever the problem isn't the child. It is precisely the error of confusing the evil with the person that promotes real division, destructive division. We're the people of unity because unity comes about when the truth is clearly lifted up, when grace and mercy are clearly proclaimed, because mercy triumphs over judgment. Life triumphs over death. I'm convinced in this movement now, in this year ahead, there will be several key priorities and victories. One, as I already said, we're going to elect public servants who know the difference between serving the public and killing the public. We're going to get out in those voting booths. We're going to register voters, we're going to educate voters, we're going to inform them, and we are going to vote them into office. And there's a second thing we're going to do, and this brings us to the honor and the award that we want to present today. To the governor, legislators, and people of Kansas who have united around life. The progress we are going to continue to make is the following. We shine a light on this blind spot that continues to exist even among so many of our brothers and sisters who advocate for social justice in so many other ways that we agree with, and yet consistently and persistently ignore the unborn. The blind spot that continues in so many of our brothers and sisters who are in leadership in this government. When you hear them speak in favor of abortion, there is something you will never hear them do. You will never hear them describe an abortion. The last thing abortion supporters want to discuss is abortion. They want to discuss abstract and theoretical concepts. Freedom of choice, the Constitution. They'll get into all kinds of philosophical and even theological debates with us. They don't want to discuss what needs to be the starting point of this debate. What is an abortion? It's amazing when folks like you and me hold up signs showing the reality of what an abortion is, or point to videos and images online showing what an abortion is. Isn't it amazing how everybody who sees those images, without even hearing us say a word, presumes that we're against abortion? Well, why do they presume that? Maybe we're for abortion and we're trying to advertise it. But the reason why they don't presume that is that those that advertise abortion never want to show what they're selling. They don't even want to admit what they're selling. But why not? This is what I challenge them. Maybe you think abortion is a good thing or a bad thing? If it's good, you're one heck of a crappy marketer. You're not even talking about your own product. But then again, on the other hand, maybe they're geniuses at marketing. the marketing of the evil one, present evil as a good. Hide the face of evil. What does Scripture tell us in Ephesians 5:11? Have nothing to do with the fruitless works of darkness, but rather expose them. What did our friends in the civil rights movement do? They exposed the evil of segregation. You know what the segregationists did in the protests the first times when they were attacking the peaceful, prayerful civil rights protesters? You know what the first thing was that they attacked? The cameras. They splashed black paint on the lenses of the cameras because they didn't want the news media or the American people or the consciences of our brothers and sisters to see the evil of segregation. And so we're, this year, facing some strategic and practical advances in this pro-life cause. And it's been done in Kansas, it's been done in Oklahoma, and it's been introduced in several other states. A measure that describes abortion, describes dismemberment abortion. There are various kinds of procedures that involve the dismemberment of the living child in the womb, living child, and then, brothers and sisters, protects those children from that dismemberment. And why is this a good strategic measure at this point in our movement? Because we need to mobilize not just pro-life people. We don't just need to mobilize the folks that are joining us for the March for Life. We also need to mobilize pro-choice people. And how do you do that? Well, because even most people who identify with themselves with the label pro-choice are not in favor of abortion in the later stages of pregnancy. And when they are told about how some of these procedures work, namely the actual tearing off of the arms, legs, and pieces of the skull, they oppose it. They still keep the pro-choice label. They don't want to see Roe v. Wade reversed. They don't want to see all abortions outlawed. But they will, and they are, joining hands with us to at least protect children in later stages of pregnancy and at least protect them from specifically defined violence. What a measure like this does is it brings the evil out from hiding and asks our legislators and the people they represent, do you or do you not believe that these children should be able to be dismembered? That's not a difficult argument to make. It's not a difficult question to pose. And this legislation poses it, and when you pose it, people answer it the right way. Now we're moving away, brothers and sisters, from the tactic the other side tries to use, abstraction and concealment. No, we bring this procedure out into the light, and that's what Kansas has done. Many of you here today are from Kansas. We've invited you to come. I came to Kansas when Governor Brownback had one of the signing ceremonies for a piece of legislation that protects unborn children in Kansas from dismemberment abortion. And we want to thank him today. We want to thank the legislators who were behind this measure. We want to thank all of the people of Kansas who were behind this measure, because what you have done is to give a rallying cry to our entire movement, a rallying cry to our entire nation. We start here. Nobody is saying that the children killed by other methods other than dismemberment should be killed. Nobody is saying that any of those other abortions are okay. Nobody in our ranks is saying that. But we are saying you take people from what is most obvious to what is least obvious. You don't start with what is least obvious. Start with what most people will agree on and then move it forward from there. Some people will object. Let me be very explicit about this, and we'll call up the governor. Some people will say, yes, but every baby is a person. Every abortion is equally wrong, so you people are wrong for focusing just on one aspect of this. We turn their argument right back on them. You believe in the personhood of every single unborn child, so do we. And it's precisely because we believe in the personhood of the children who are about to be dismembered that when we can protect them now, we must. We must. We cannot wait. People will say to us, oh, but you can't wait. You can't wait. We got to protect them all now. And we're saying, you can't wait, you can't wait. You got to protect them now, everyone you possibly can. And that's why we introduce measures like this. The children who can be saved today don't have a right to life that depends on our ability to save the other ones. Their right to life is independent of that. Their right to life towers above any limitations we have on saving the rest of the children. We are going to save them all. We are going to see the end of abortion. We are going to see the protection of every unborn child. But brothers and sisters, to get there, we must move now. We can't sit back and wait in some kind of idealistic bubble. We move now, and Kansas has moved. And the nation will continue to move. And we're going to work today to urge every state to take the example according to its own opportunities and its own possibilities. Because politics and legislative activity is very practical. We examine the possibilities and we move forward where we can move. And therefore, at this time, I would like to invite our friend, Governor Sam Brownback of Kansas, to come forward. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And Governor, you are here. You have taken the time and trouble to come to us here in Washington, despite the prediction of the weather, to receive this from the National Pro-Life Religious Council, Priests for Life, in fact, from the whole pro-life movement. And let me read what this says. We present the Pro-Life Recognition Award to Governor Sam Brownback and the legislators and people of Kansas for being the first in the nation to enact the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act. January 22nd, 2016, Washington, D.C. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Would you address us for a few moments?
Thanks, Father Pavone. What a stirring, passionate presentation Father Pavone was putting on, and it just was, keep going, yeah. I'm very honored to receive this on behalf of the people of the state of Kansas. I feel like really what I did in coming in to being governor now 6 years ago in the state of Kansas, and having signed now 16 pro-life bills in the state of Kansas, 16. Is really harvest all the work that you've done for many years. I mean, you, the pro-life movement. We'd had governors before that were pro-choice. They'd kind of push back. They'd really push back. They would do things underneath to push back, and then nothing gets done. Nothing happens. And I came in and I said, we are a pro-life state, and we are not going back. We're going to move forward on this. And so and this was the 16th pro-life bill, was this dismemberment bill. And you just think about it, I was up here in the United States Senate when we passed partial birth abortion. I had the same kind of attitude that Father Pavone was talking about when they first proposed that, saying, well, there's not that many partial birth abortions. Why are we doing this? We need to go at a bigger picture. But what it did was it educated the public about this awful thing that was going on, that you're actually partially birthing a child and then killing it. And when the public hears about these things, and when they see these things, which by and large, a lot of people, look, I just don't want to hear about this stuff. I know what goes on, but I just really don't want to hear about it. But when they hear about it, they're just going, oh, that is really ugly. I don't want to see that taking place in my country. That doesn't seem like the thing a civilized nation would do. And they rejected it, and it passed the Congress, and it passed the Supreme Court. So we thought this piece, the dismemberment ban, would be the next step forward on that. So, okay, the child's not born yet, but you're actually ripping the child apart in the womb to pull it out. It's ugly. It's terrible. You describe it even in the abstract, it looks ugly. You look at the pictures of what takes place, and it's even worse still. And that passed by large bipartisan margins in both houses. And it's something that needs to move forward across the country and in the nation's capital, is to ban these dismemberment abortions, and to do it now. And you need to push it in your state to educate people about it. And this is the sort of thing you have to do. Father Pavone's right. In any sort of social movement, you got to get the issue in front of the public, and it can't be an abstract one. When William Wilberforce was advocating for the end of the slave trade, he talked about it, but we didn't really get very far. It wasn't until they took people to slave ships and they showed them the shackles. They said, this is what happens here. Do you like this? And he said, no, I hate that. Well, then let's stop doing it. And it took him his entire political career to get it done, but they got it done.
Oh, yeah.
They got it done. And that's what we need to do. Planned Parenthood needs to be defunded. With what has been exposed and what's been shown, that needs to happen. And you need to continue this push. Now, the mainstream media isn't going to help in the spread of this message. I had an interview a week ago with somebody in the mainstream media, and they were saying, well, you're defunding Planned Parenthood in the state of Kansas. And I said, yes, we are. First year I got into office, we did most of it. We're getting the rest of it this year. I said, well, those videos, well, they were highly edited. And I said, those videos are accurate. And this is the trafficking in baby body parts. This is awful. It ought to be stopped. And anybody associated with it. This is terrible. But this is how you have to do these types of movements. You've just got to show it. And the beauty is, the truth is beautiful. Truth is beauty. This is not beautiful. This is ugly. This is a lie. Lies are ugly. Truth is beautiful. And we need to describe truth. We need to describe the lies. I hosted, when I was in the Senate here, a hearing where we had both Roe, the plaintiff of Roe, and the plaintiff of Doe, of Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, in to testify. First time together to both say that those two cases are built on lies. And they openly testified about that. Both these women did. Guess how many TV cameras we had there at that hearing? Not hardly any. These are two big cases in U.S. history. And you got the two plaintiffs standing here saying these are lies, and you got nobody covering it? Really? Well, that means it's up to you. That means it's up to me. And now today, thanks to social media, you got a lot of options that you can use and push forward and keep spreading the information. And we are winning this battle. Truth ultimately wins. We are winning this battle. But you just got to keep at it. You got to keep praying. You got to keep fighting. I want to close with one quick story. About 150 years ago, not 2 blocks from here, there was a president by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and he had a meeting with a lady by the name of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And he looks at her. She was a small woman, and he was a very tall man. He looks at her and he says, well, you're the little woman that started this big fight. It's his quote to her. She'd written passionately. She had described what was taking place. Awful. It's public news, but they didn't really, I just really don't want to be reminded. I don't want to see it. But she had written to a country that then saw it. And it was a civil war that moved forward. Slavery was ended. There were many lives lost. But the issue of slavery was ended. Kansas was at the forefront of that. We came into the statehood being called Bleeding Kansas because the fight over whether it was going to be a slave or a free state took place there, and there was blood spilled. And we came in as a free state and been fighting for freedom ever since. Harriet Beecher Stowe closes and says this in one of her quotes that I think applies to today. Every nation that carries in its bosom great and unredressed injustice has in it the elements of this last convulsion. That's what she wrote. We have to deal with this. It needs to take place. I'm proud of you to be here. I'm proud of you that you are here. I'm proud on behalf of the state of Kansas to receive this award, but this is a milestone. But it's not the end by any means. The end is to end this injustice that sits in our bosom. Carry it on. God bless you all.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you out in Kansas. We'll come back and we'll fire up the troops.
Good.
was trying to hide away, ashamed of the light of day. Made a choice, thinking I'd be free, but that choice, it imprisoned me in my shame. Till I stepped into the light of God's love, the healing began. I'm free from the shame, I'm healed of the pain. I will be silent no more. I'm free from the lies, love opened my eyes. I will be silent no more. Love broke through to the heart of me. Now the truth has come and set me free from the past. When I stepped into the light of God's love, forgiven at last. I'm free from the shame, I'm healed of the pain. I will be silent no more. I'm free from the lies, love opened my eyes. I will be silent no more. There is power in my story, freedom from this night. There is healing and forgiveness if we step into the light. I'm free from the shame, I'm healed of the pain. I will be silent no more. I'm free from the lies, love opened my eyes. I will be silent no more. I'm free from the shame, I'm healed of the pain. I will be silent no more. I'm free from the lies, love opened my eyes. I will be silent no
Hi friends, this is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life. If you appreciate the work that my team and I do around the country and around the world to save babies from abortion, then I ask you to support us with your donations. Even though Priests for Life is very, very highly praised by the Vatican and by bishops and dioceses across the country, we do not receive official church funding of any kind. Rather, we rely on people like you, individual donations that people are giving every day because they want to see these lives saved. So would you go today to prolifedonation.org and help us financially? Every bit of what you give will be directed to this pro-life mission. prolifedonation.org. You'll be able to give us a gift of your own choosing, or you can become a monthly contributor, and that, of course, helps us to plan with confidence our activities for the coming year and beyond. prolifedonation.org, we await hearing from you and your generosity, inspired by the Lord of Life. Thank you in advance, and God bless you. This is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life.
You know, God's mercy endures forever, and it's never too late to come back to the church. And we're going to talk about that in light of this topic regarding the sexual revolution and healing the wounds of the sexual revolution in this edition, this episode of The Catholic View for Women. Thanks for joining us for our program. I'm Teresa Tomeo, joined as always by my beautiful and very talented and smart co-host Janet Morana and Astrid Bennett Gutierrez. Boy, is this a big topic.
That's right.
Healing the wounds of the sexual revolution, and the wounds are vast.
Absolutely.
And very deep.
Yes,
Right.
I was at a conference not so long ago. Dr. Jennifer Robeck-Morse of the Ruth Institute had a conference. It was called Healing the 21st Century Family. And basically, we're familiar with some of the victims of the sexual revolution, which basically destroyed what we traditionally knew as family and sex, belonging, and marriage. All these ideas became archaic. I mean, according to, new ways of thinking and the sexual revolution, and, Humanae Vitae tried to rectify all that, but unfortunately the culture of death has been unleashed. And we're familiar with victims like post-abortion, victims. But now we're realizing there are many more victims that are not being talked about. So the church invites many people to heal. The church, the scripture, everything, our sacraments are there to heal us. So we're going to explore the different victims that the sexual revolution has wrought, unfortunately.
And it's interesting because it was really given to us, and Janet and I, of course, you're still suffering the consequences of people your age, and not you personally, but people your age, because it's just spilled over. It's just continued the mistakes that we made, that we bought into.
No, and I think everybody has suffered. I mean, I can tell you my
generation
story.
after generation.
Absolutely.
There's a
broken
fallout
families.
From it.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think back to when I was a child growing up, and basically most of the girls in my high school did not sleep around. If they did, one or two girls, they were considered the bad girls. But then with as you got into the late 60s and the pill was rampant, and it became like if you weren't sleeping around, you were considered something wrong with you. And so you went from a culture that sex was inside of marriage because sex became recreational, It wasn't supposed to be inside of marriage. Just everyone was entitled to it. Have sex whenever you want, and it was supposed to be empowering for women. And of course, from that came abortion, and so on and so on. And now, in this day and age, it's friends with benefits, hooked up. The hooked up culture. I mean, friends with benefits. I mean, you have a good friend, and the benefit is you sleep with them. I mean, that is so bizarre to thinking.
But there's so much more than that, Janet, because now we're seeing things like that we never heard of before. Now in this generation, we have young people growing up who know their father was a sperm donor. I mean, we have Alana Stewart, who has a beautiful ministry to people who have this identity crisis. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about these days. Unfortunately, it's because of the sexual revolution that has destroyed the model that God created. God designed family, and she started her conference by showing a picture of the Holy Family, and then saying what we know as family, what we grew up to think was family, unfortunately has been disbanded, and here we're seeing the consequences. But the church has the solution, that Christ can heal, he can reconcile, and that's the message. It's not to depress people with all these topics about woundedness and so much destruction, but rather that the church has a response for it all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've mentioned to you a few times that I was interviewed during the canonization by a reporter about the church and whatnot, and he said, well, there's so many people that say that the church is obsessed with sex. And my response was, okay, let's see. We have sexual content, which is over the top in terms of TV. We have pornography as an addiction. We have so many sexually transmitted diseases, and the church is obsessed with sex. No, I think it's the world that is obsessed with sex, and we're suffering for it. Well, let's take a look to see what Dr. Jennifer Robeck-Morse from the Ruth Institute has to say about this whole issue, and really about helping all of us heal the wounds of the sexual revolution.
Did any of you see a few months, probably a couple months ago by now, on the cover of Time magazine, there was this cover story on the childless life, the child-free life. Did any of you see that story? Does this ring a bell with anybody? Okay. If you walk by the supermarket, there it is, the child-free life. You read this story and ask yourself, what is the point of this story? There was no news in the story. There was no new information, no new scientific breakthrough or anything like that. What is that story doing there? I'll tell you what it's there for. That story was a bit of propaganda. It was a bit of carefully calculated propaganda to remind all of us that the child-free life, that sex doesn't have to create babies, and that you can have a wonderful life without babies. Now, I often wonder, if I were still going through infertility, what I would have felt like walking by that story, right? And wonder what, probably a lot of people walking by that story looking at that. But the point is, that was meant to be a piece of propaganda to remind us all that sex doesn't have to make babies. It's a piece of propaganda to support the sexual revolution. So let me define for you what I mean when I say the sexual revolution, because I've been using this term. And I think it's very important that we name what we're dealing with, that we label it, that we're clear about it. That's the only thing that's going to get us out of the situation that we're in, because there's a lot of big clouds of, thrown around our minds, so we can't think clearly or see clearly. So here's how I define the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution separated sex from childbearing and separated both sex and childbearing from marriage. Okay, so sexual revolution says that it's okay and proper to separate sex from reproduction and to separate both of those things from marriage. If you go through and think about all the things we normally consider part of the sexual revolution, you'll see that every one of them has something to do with separating one of those things. It was something that used to be integrated, an integrated whole, is now being parceled out and pieced out, right? So we actually, this idea, this original idea, it was a very seductive idea. This is what we have to come to grips with as women of faith. We have to face the reality that the idea of the sexual revolution is very seductive. It's appealing to think that you can have sex without babies. That was the opening gambit, so to speak, right? Sex without babies. This is going to be so fun. Well, now we're to the point where we're having babies without having sex, which I'm pretty sure is not as much fun as the old-fashioned way. But this is where we are. And our ability to be in human relationships has been completely compromised, because human sexuality, which is meant to build a family, which is meant to create a baby, and to build up the relationship and the love between the husband and the wife, the mother and the father. That's what human sexuality is meant to do. Instead, we've turned it into a consumer good. We've commodified every piece of it. So our ability to be in relationship with one another is severely compromised. Now, what I want to say about this is that the only coherent alternative to the sexual revolution is the Catholic position. The Catholic position is the only coherent and humane alternative to the sexual revolution. Now, sometimes we can refer to this, if we're in an audience that's not all Catholic, as this one pretty much is. I think I hope there are a few non-Catholics here, but we can say without compromise, we can say the ancient Christian teaching is the only coherent alternative. The ancient Christian teaching of all the churches. Until 1930, all of the churches believed the same thing, right? So the fact that there are differences of opinion today between Protestants and Catholics, that's a new thing. And we can remind our Protestant brothers and sisters that right up until the day before yesterday, everybody believed that sex and babies went together and that both went with marriage. Everybody believed that, right? And so we need to call upon that and present the fact that this is coherent. Now, in one of my talks, I have a recorded talk called Smart Sex, Finding Lifelong Love in a Hookup World. There's a series of 3 CD talks in there. One of those talks is called The Church Has Been Right All Along, basically. And so you can go through and explain piece by piece how this is true. I don't have time to do that today, but I just want to point out that it's true. I think it can be done, that scientifically, social scientifically, the Catholic position, the ancient Christian position, is in fact the coherent alternative to this very seductive idea of the sexual revolution. But having said that, I want to go back to that family of the 1950s, that family I grew up in, that family that I mentioned to you at the very beginning. Because, there were problems in that family, right? It was not like it was all bliss. We weren't all the Holy Family, back then. We thought we were supposed to be, but we weren't. And that's what we were running from something. When all these ideas hit the culture, people leaped to embrace them. There has to be a reason why they did that, right? And part of the reason they did it is because there were problems in the 1950s. So I don't want you to think that I'm nostalgic for June and Ward Cleaver or something. Although I have to say, there was nothing structurally wrong with the family of the 50s. Let's make this little distinction. The structure of the family of the 50s was exactly what it ought to have been. People got married, they stayed married, unless somebody did really something awful. You get married, you stay married. You only have sex with the person you're married to. That would solve a lot of problems right there, you gotta admit, right? If you only have sex with the person you're married to, you take care of the babies that you have, and you leave other people's kids alone. You know, that was pretty much the structure, right? That's pretty much it. So the problem with the family of the 50s was not a structural problem. The problem was there was not enough love in the family. If you think about it, why did we head for the exits? Those of you who remember doing this or remember other people doing it, what were we running from? Well, there was a lot of quarreling, a lot of bickering, a lot of ingratitude, a lot of taking people for granted. You know, a lot of that type of stuff was going on inside the family, and so we didn't realize that that the solution to these problems was not to give ourselves cheaper and faster exit options, which is what the sexual revolution did. The solution was more love inside the family. That was the solution. We had it right at our fingertips. We just didn't know it, right? And so all those exit options that we're all so excited about, all of our independence and everything, well, what has that generated? It's generated loneliness. The biggest problem of our time really is loneliness, I would say. And I think that this loneliness grieves our Lord. I think that Jesus is grieved by the kind of loneliness that we experience in our culture, that so many do. And so just for a few moments, I'd like you to close your eyes and imagine what our lives could have been like or could yet be like if we would just do things God's way. Maybe you can picture yourself. Maybe you can picture someone you know. But just picture somebody. What does Jesus want for us? What has he always wanted for us? Well, what he wants is for every sexual act to be an act of integrity and an act of self-giving. He wants every child to be born to a married mother and father who love each other. He wants every mother and father to love and care for each other and their children. Isn't that how it should be? Isn't that how we all wish it would be? What Jesus wants is for every family to be an island of forgiveness and repentance, an island of generosity and gratitude, loyalty and service. Those are the things that will keep the family going. And every community should be built up from a foundation of love within that family. That is what our Lord Jesus Christ wants for us, for all of us and our neighbors. Isn't it? That's the vision.
Dr. Morse makes so many great points in that segment, that clip that we ran. Now, when we come back, we'll continue our discussion and help you, your friends, and your loved ones heal from the wounds of the sexual revolution. Stay tuned for the rest of this discussion on the Catholic View for Women. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Catholic View for Women. I'm Teresa Tomeo, along, of course, with Janet Marana and Astrid Bene-Gutierrez. This is a tough topic, but something I think that probably just about everybody knows something about. We're talking about healing the wounds of the sexual revolution, and you may have seen the clip that we just played of an expert on this topic, Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. She's an author, speaker, and she has really taken this topic and done so much on this, especially its impact on marriage, because she has a whole ministry actually dedicated. That's what the Ruth Institute does. She's all about marriage and what marriage is and why it can't be redefined. But this whole topic of the sexual revolution, we were mentioning before the break and actually before the clip with Dr. Morse, the fallout from this. And Astrid, you were saying, even at your age, that you've seen the fallout from the sexual revolution.
Absolutely, and Dr. Morse makes a point that's very interesting. She says that the sexual revolution has been especially bad for the poor. And I work with the poor at a pregnancy center in downtown LA, and right, in the middle of 9 abortion clinics in a Hispanic neighborhood. My parents actually met there, and what I see every day is people who buy the lies of the culture of death. And what are we seeing? We're seeing abortion, contraception, of course, out of wedlock births, cohabitation, people who don't believe in marriage anymore. They don't see the value.
Even in the Hispanic culture.
Even in the Hispanic culture. Even though I think they might identify themselves as people who are for family, I think the concept of marriage, if we don't defend it, you know, it's going to go by the wayside, and it is. I'm seeing it in our own community, the Hispanic community. That's why we have to go back and teach, but also understand that there's a lot of healing that has to take place. So Dr. Morse, you know, she's, apart from being, you know, a pro-life activist and, of course, being involved in the family movement and the marriage movement. She's a very bold speaker.
Right,
in
we've
defense
done
of marriage.
conferences together, women's conferences together.
She was a professor at Yale and George Mason, and now she's a research fellow at Stanford. So she really studies economics, you know, and the social aspect of what happens in the sexual revolution. But she sums up her mission in a clever way. She says, you know, we want to clean up the sexual revolution, and basically is confronting what has happened because we bought the lies. And basically what the sexual revolution has taught is, number one, it's desirable and possible to separate sex and procreation from each other.
Right.
And to separate both.
Sure, well, that's
from
what
marriage.
birth control does. I mean, you know, it's to
Absolutely.
say that I can have sex as much as I want. It's almost like having a party for yourself because I don't have to worry about having children. I'll use my contraception, and if it fails, there's abortion. So therefore, no big deal. I mean, that's what it's come. People have come to rely on that, and this way we can have sex as often and as much as you want. It's almost like if you're not sleeping around, the culture's saying there's something wrong with you.
Isn't it ridiculous and so unfair to women that when this whole idea of the sexual revolution and that name, that push, that women were led to believe and are still led to believe every single day, every time they turn on the TV, every time they pick up Cosmo or heaven forbid whatever else they're reading, that the only way to freedom is tied to sex.
Right.
That's it. I mean, maybe their careers, but that's not even emphasized as much anymore as it is sexuality.
Yes, that's how you get love.
That's where we get the HHS mandate. That's where we get all this other stuff that goes with it. It's all about sexual freedom.
But she has a twist to this in her new research and her new work, and she says that there are some new victims that we might not be recognizing.
Such as?
The heartbroken career woman, the woman who neutered herself in her 20s to get her career you know, going, and then she has this very impressive resume, but what that resume doesn't show was the price she paid to get there, and now maybe in her 30s and 40s is trying to have a family and cannot, and she doesn't understand why, so now they resort to in vitro fertilization and all these things that we know are so destructive and in their health. That's one of them, and also the children of divorce. You know, I myself am a child of separated parents, and so the pain that comes from that can also affect your future relationships, your vocation. The reluctantly divorced, people who have been abandoned because of no-fault divorce. Now the spouse that desires least the marriage can just leave the marriage. So there's so many victims apart from the ones you're mentioning regarding contraception. So, and I mentioned earlier about Alana Stewart. She's has a ministry for people, young people who are the children of sperm donors, you know, and she's a recent convert to the Catholic Church, by the way, and she herself, even though she was conceived this way, she says that she believes it's a very violent way of obtaining a child.
That's so interesting because we don't hear a lot about that. I've read some stories about, even in secular magazines, about men and women who are, you know, were conceived that way, and they walk down the street looking at people wondering, is that my father, is that my father? And then it also affects their relationships because they think that possibly, because of the way they were brought into this world, that maybe they're having a relationship with someone who's actually related to them.
Right. Absolutely, and then they in turn become, like she herself, Alana became she donated her eggs herself, and she said she regrets that tremendously, but I think it's a way that she's trying to validate her identity, is to be part of this you know, game as well. And then we should also highlight, in terms of contraception, the victims of that need healing, the cohabitating woman who would like to get married but who can't get her boyfriend to commit.
But why should he commit in this world? I mean, what the world says, if I don't like this, I can move on to something else.
So the door is open, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. The depressed teenage girl who can't figure out why she's so depressed over her hookups. So this hookup culture that you were talking about, it's so destructive to her sense of self, and she's doing the thing that she sees or is being told that gives her happiness, and yet she's not feeling happy.
That's right. And like you mentioned, cohabitating, you know, statistically it shows that couples who cohabitate before marriage have a greater degree of divorce.
Right.
This is what the studies are showing than couples who have lived chaste apart before marriage.
Yes.
You know, so again, the sexual urges, the hookup culture, leading down this road is proving that it's not good for ourselves.
But do we see that there's a chain of events here? Because people who are cohabitating might be people who are children of divorce that might say, well, you know, I don't want
I don't want to go through that.
I don't want to go through that. That's painful.
Yeah,
I don't
marriage
see
didn't work out for my parents, so why
chain.
should I go down that road?
So there's a lot of healing that has to take place. Of course, this is the post-abortive woman who has bought into the lies of the culture of death.
Post-abortive men.
The men, too. The single mothers, of course, the
men who have
contraception
been
fails.
emasculated, that's a whole other thing.
Absolutely,
Right.
so many. So what she's proposing is that, as an answer to this, of course, bringing out the truth, but then also a radical sense of forgiveness, that we forgive others, because in this way we're being Christ-like. And forgiveness, we often hear about forgiveness being something you do for yourself, like do it so that you feel better if you forgive. She's saying no, forgiveness is a gift that you give someone else, not because they deserve it, you know, but it's the Christ-like approach, and it's what's going to heal the culture. So I think it's interesting what she says in the clip is that it's not about going back to the 50s, although structurally the family was the way it was supposed to be, but that maybe there should have been more forgiveness, you know, when the teen daughter got pregnant, how was she treated, you know, this sort of thing. So let's get back that structure, but then let's introduce more love, more forgiveness.
Well, you know, just the other day at the gym, one of the girls that uses the same trainer as I do, we were there, and she goes, oh, look, I finally got engaged. And I said, oh, really? Well, how long were you dating? Oh, my boyfriend and I, we've known each other for 10 years, and we lived together for the past 6 years. So all this living together, it took him, knowing this girl, a total of 10 years to finally...
And she was still so excited when she got the ring.
She was so excited.
It
was kind of like, well, it's about time, and now they're first going to get married and maybe think of having a family. Like a whole decade of her life went by, and see, did all this cohabitating with him speed things up? No, it took him 6 more years living with her before he finally popped the question.
And do you realize, I mean, the thing about children, too, about thinking, maybe down the line I'll have a child. I don't think people hear enough that a child is a blessing. It's all over Scripture. I don't think we're sharing the good news.
Well, the Pope has talked about that a lot in the past few months, and when he met with married couples not too long ago, he said, really, he talked about the importance of commitment in a relationship. He said it so beautifully about when you're married, you know, you forgive, and you are in this for good times and in bad. That's a message. That's another fallout of the sexual revolution, that we're not hearing about this because we're thinking, well, again, as we said earlier, if you have a relationship, it doesn't work out, you can just go and move into the next one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the Catechism has a lot to say about that, and I think, Ashley, we have a couple of things we want to do. We're going to have a lot more for you to do for homework. However, first, I'd like to point out passage 2526, which reads, so-called moral permissiveness rests on an erroneous concept of human freedom. The necessary precondition for the development of true freedom is to let oneself be educated in moral law. Those in charge of education can reasonably be expected to give young people instruction respectful of the truth, the qualities of the heart, and the moral and spiritual dignity of man.
And the next paragraph is beautiful.
Oh, I love this.
The good news of Christ continually renews the life and culture of fallen man. It combats and removes the error and evil which flow from the ever-present attraction of sin. It never ceases to purify and elevate the morality of peoples. It takes the spiritual qualities and endowments of every age and nation, and with supernatural riches it causes them to blossom, as it were, from within. It fortifies, completes, and restores them in Christ.
That's
It's
right.
beautiful.
That's so beautiful.
And Dr. Morse's ideas about the sexual revolution and are encapsulated in her book Smart Sex, which she says she wanted to call dumb sex because it's what it is. And what is smart sex? It's married sex. Sex within the boundaries that God created for it.
Yeah. Smart sex is not
It's listen to your mother as in Holy Mother Church.
That's right.
Yes.
And we have about 2 minutes left. So
Homework.
just in perfect timing for our homework.
We have a lot of homework, starting with, we just mentioned, of course, you mentioned the Ruth Institute website, ruthinstitute.org. That's our speaker's website. Then we have of course, the Humana Vitae encyclical. If you haven't read it, you should. And
Humana Vitae is a very quick read, too.
Quick read.
And it's not a difficult read. I want to encourage people, if they haven't, and we've said it a gazillion times on this show, and I talk about it on my radio program, read it.
And Father
It's
Pavone
prophetic.
and our team have a study guide and the encyclical all in one. You can get that on our website. We'll tell you how to get it. I said, of course, Catechism of the Catholic Church, and we have paragraphs 2517 through 2533 available at the Religious Catalog. Of course, the book that Jennifer Roback Morse wrote, Smart Sex, like
Finding Lifelong Love in a Hookup Culture.
Hookup World, exactly. And of course, Teresa's book, Extreme Makeover, and mine, Recall Abortion, have some other great information and chapters as to why this is not the path to go down, available at the Religious Catalog. Lots of resources, of course, on our website, discussion, questions.
Just a little light reading, but
Just a little.
some good reading, and it's really jam-packed. The
And all
resources
of
we're
these,
giving
these make good gifts for your teenage daughters
College
and
students.
sons, college, all of them. They should get one of these
and
resources.
yourself, and they're good resources to have in the house too, to
Absolutely.
help you kind of revisit the topic. And
Exactly.
we have a lot of statistics and research. Well, good discussion. We're talking about healing the wounds of the sexual revolution. We'll have more on this topic on our next episode of The Catholic View for Women. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to check out our website. That's thecatholicviewforwomen.com. If you didn't have a pencil to write everything down, it's all there online. We'll see you next time on The Catholic View for Women right here on EWTN.
Well, friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this broadcast segment of Priests for Life TV. We will be each day increasing the amount of time during which we bring you live broadcasts. And in the intervening time, you can call upon our large archive of video to watch on demand. So we hope that you'll spread the word about Priests for Life TV as we grow this brand new pro-life internet channel. Thank you for watching. Please do spread the word, and we'll be back with another broadcast segment very soon. This is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life.